One of the largest economic concentrations of activity in Tokyo. Something like 40% of the GDP is basically right here within.
Right.
I think that there's a couple of trends here that can play very well for foreigners to come to Japan. I don't think any country globally is maybe as well positioned as Japan is to benefit from Gen AI. You may not have all the AI companies come from Japan, but I think there's a reason why OpenAI set their first international office up outside of the US and Japan.
So Casey Abel-san, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
So you have been in Japan since 19 years old,
Yep.
and you have co-founded 2 companies in Japan and started 3 businesses in Japan.
Yep, that's correct.
So what made you come to Japan?
So I originally had family reasons to come here, and kind of leveraging that, I ended up going to university at Rikyo University for about 2 years. Studied finance and international business there, and then kind of one thing led to another, and basically never went back.
And you run Zookeep, which is, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So at Zookeep, we're basically focused on modernizing and digitalizing human resources and talent acquisition within Japan and Southeast Asia. So we're building our own software platform with multi-functionality to help with operational efficiency, but also helping Japanese corporations to improve their competitiveness by getting access to the talent that they need.
So today's topic will be about why people should come to Japan and maybe work in Japan. So
Sure.
what's your shortest answer?
Japan is wonderful, and it's full of opportunity if you figure it out right. So I think it's a very, very unique place to develop your career and has a ton of optionality once you figure it all out.
So why is that?
So I think that there's a couple of things. One, in a lot of respects, Japan is still very far behind, I'd say, the West or global standards when it comes to management kind of practices, as well as kind of digital implementation and digital deployments. So kind of just leveraging those kind of fundamental gaps, I do think that there's an immense opportunity. Also, I think it shouldn't be understated that, still the 3rd or 4th largest economy in the world, you've got one of the largest economic concentrations of activity in Tokyo. Something like 40% of the GDP is basically right here within Tokyo, right? So I think the concentration of economic activity compounded by some of the gaps that do tangibly exist creates just really incredible opportunities. And then on top of that, it's an absolutely beautiful place. So it's very popular for tourism right now, and there's a lot of opportunities even in the hospitality space that I think people can leverage if they know what they're doing.
How about the economy? Because the stocks are rising, rocket high. So what are you witnessing? What's like Japan right now?
Like the driver, economically speaking? So I think that there's a couple of things. I think Japan Inc. was really shocked to its core in the pandemic. The over-reliance on kind of the paper-based business processes and the ringi, kind of like the group-wide decision-making kind of practice, got really flipped on its head when we all got sent home, right? So I do think one major driver of it is this shock to the system that we experienced with everybody having to go home and re-architect business processes and digitalize almost overnight.
Right.
The other very obvious thing I think is Japan is a huge beneficiary of the US-China tensions that we're all experiencing. So there's a lot of inbound FDI investment. A lot of the money from whether it's North America or Europe that was going to China is now going to Southeast Asia, Northeast Asia, other parts of the world. And Japan's obviously a huge beneficiary of that. So I think there's some compounding elements that are happening, and then you take on top of that the declining population and the compounding issues that are coming from there. And I think Japan is really at a potential kind of inflection point of change when you look at it from a couple of different angles.
How about the startups?
Startups, yeah. So startups are hot. There's a lot of activity. Funding over the last 10 years, I think, is up something like 10x. I forget the exact figure. But even just in my own communities that I know here, more and more people are getting comfortable with taking the risk of launching their own business.
True, yeah.
And also more and more people are actually wanting to tangibly attack incumbent problems and trying to help solve real problems. And so I see a lot more activity, especially in the domestic startup community. There are still foreigners doing it as well, but I also see just incredible tailwinds from a very domestic perspective for startups here as well.
Do you think the world is aware of that change, or it's not noticed yet?
It's becoming aware. I still think that there's hesitancy, maybe from global investors because of maybe some regulatory challenges or still, frankly, maybe lack of quality founders or proven founders who have kind of gone through the startup cycle and exited. But I do know tangibly a lot more people have their eyes on the Japanese startup ecosystem just from everybody that we talk to.
So you are in the Japanese ecosystem startup. So
Yeah.
any companies, not only startups, but you come aware, what company are you?
Within the startup
with-
ecosystem?
Or maybe like the other companies as well.
Yeah, so there's a couple of companies that come to mind from a startup perspective that I think are pretty interesting. One's not truly a startup, but it was an offshoot from Toyota, which is Woven Planet. They've been basically operated as a startup for many years, brought in an immense amount of really truly global caliber engineering talent. They've got their smart city project, and they've got their project for making the world's most kind of software-defined vehicle.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff going on, which is really exciting, and I see that as a really interesting litmus test for Japan's ability to bring foreigners in. On a smaller scale, though, I mean, you have everything from the mega startups that are companies like Mercari that were, they've done very, very well in e-commerce, down to even new entrants that I think are very exciting, like a company like Numo, who is really going to attack kind of like the Uber business model in
Right.
Japan and try to revolutionize the taxi market. You're starting to see larger funding checks earlier, and you're also starting to see a lot of Japanese companies apply more global standards when it comes to like building their organization and how they're deploying and using technology. So, whether it's like the mega corporate offshoot startup like a Woven Planet, the mega startup down to some of the newer players like Numo and frankly even Zookeep, I think that there's some really interesting companies that are starting to bubble up here that could become quite interesting over time. Not to mention even companies like Sakana AI, right?
Sakana, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
They're awesome, yeah.
they're on everybody's mind. And they're killing it, so I love what those guys are doing as well.
So since you mentioned Numo, so
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that we don't have like no Uber in Japan. So
Right.
why was that? And do you think that's changing in Japan?
Historically speaking, Japan has always been a relatively protected economy, so pretty highly regulated in a lot of
Yes.
industries, and something that I think a lot of foreigners don't fully understand or appreciate is kind of generally speaking, socially, the Japanese will often prioritize maybe stability and employment over short-term profitability.
Right.
And so something like the taxi union is something that maybe from the outside looking in as a consumer, you're like, oh, that's stupid. We should have ride hailing. It should be so easy. But I think that to a degree, I kind of agreed with the approach in Japan where they protected that union for a while to allow everybody to try to figure out,
Yes.
rather than suddenly making 80,000 people unemployed or however many taxi drivers there are. The lack of Uber in Japan was more regulatory driven in politics than it was the actual consumers, the economy itself. But they also recognize that they need to change. And so deregulating this taxi industry, the power markets were another thing that went through a lot of deregulation in the last 10 years as well. I see it's just, in Japan, oftentimes it's not if, just kind of a when. Sometimes the when is a lot slower than,
Yes.
especially as a foreigner, you want it to be. But again, you got to tick to the beat of Japan. So I think a lot of kind of the lack of Uber here is more regulatory driven than anything else.
Do you think Japanese people are kind of afraid of something, or do you think that's kind of a strength to be more careful and cautious?
Yeah. So to be more cautious, I can see its strengths, and I can also understand why they are where they are, especially we had like 20 or 25 years of deflation. And so you got to kind of understand the psychology of that, and like it's better to defer a purchase for a year because it's actually cheaper. So I think that's kind of part of the reason why we got to where we are. But then again, this compounding issue that we talked about earlier around some of the changes happening in Japan, that cautious approach has actually led a lot of industries and companies to becoming less structurally competitive globally. And it's actually getting to a point now where, like in Japanese, we say yabai, but it's it's really crazy. You gotta really, right. You gotta have your eyes on this. And so I do think that cautiousness, albeit very charming in some regards, is getting to a point now in a lot of industries where if they don't really start to change, you've got competitors coming in from a lot of markets, technology's changing. So incumbents, albeit may not get displaced, have sometimes had significantly decreasing profitability, et cetera, over the years. So I think it's something just to kind of keep in mind.
Right. As a Japanese, I kind of have mixed feeling because being cautious can sometimes lead to good points of society. It's very safe in Japan.
Yeah.
Very clean. The trains are safe. There's like less conflicts compared to the Western countries.
Yeah.
So I kind of have mixed feeling. What's your take on that?
I do as well.
Okay.
I mean, I honestly, I do. I mean, I've been here since I was 19. And so I've really grown to appreciate the stability that cautious approach has created, societally speaking. One thing, though, that I don't think that we can discount when we think about that is actually how wealthy Japan became prior to the bubble, and how I feel that one of the reasons why we've been able to maintain that level of safety and everything is because we've been able to ride on elements of that wealth. And so we're starting to kind of run out of that kind of inertial capital that we were riding for the last 30 years in different elements of the society. So I think, although I really do agree with you, I do think that it's kind of like the boiling frog problem in a way, right? And I think the water's getting hot. And so I think we just got to be a little bit, from a Japanese perspective, a little bit more aware and willing to go risk on or take risks, because you want to protect what you have here. And frankly, it's probably the best place I've ever lived. So I think it's in a lot of ways. So it's safe, it's clean, you can trust people. So it's got everything you want in that sense.
Since you run Zuki, which is like a human resource company, so do you think the Japanese people, the business professionals, are changing? They're leaving big companies to go to startups or maybe starting their own companies. Do you feel that change, or not being cautious but taking more risks?
In general, yes, but it's still at the margin. So I don't want to kind of misspeak here and say, oh, suddenly everybody's risk on.
Okay.
But I would say over the last, compared to say 13 or 14 years ago, it's absolutely more risk on, and you're seeing a lot more people quitting their first job after 3 years and looking for a new job, which historically was unheard of because it was lifetime employment. Recently, I was talking with a very famous kind of a tier 1 top 15 Japanese corporate, and one of the challenges that they're experiencing now is since the pandemic, every year they're losing between 100 to 150 middle management, primarily to startups.
Wow.
And this is unheard of.
That's a big number.
It's a brain drain, right? And so they have this big issue now where they have to backfill middle management. And at the same time, they've also got DE&I requirements coming in from their institutional investors, and they're trying to change the makeup of their workforce to be either more female or more diverse. And so I think like a lot of these elements, first of all, I think a lot of Japanese people also realized that the classical way of working, probably up until the pandemic for most of them, was very unsustainable. And they got that taste of either working from home or flexible work, or frankly spending more time maybe with their kids. That caused a lot of people to just very fundamentally change their thoughts about work. It's not only a Japan thing, it's happened all over the world. I don't see that reversing. But now what we're starting to see is the Japanese corporates recognizing the gaps, and now we're starting to see them trying to take steps to make things better as well.
So why are they leaving? For money, or for quality of life, or what are you observing?
Generally speaking, I think it's the quality of life, or maybe even to a deeper degree, like yarigai, which is a Japanese word that a lot of people globally know, but it's kind of that intersection of doing what you're passionate about and you enjoy, and something that also has meaning at the same time. And so I do think a lot of kind of classical salarymen, salarywomen types that worked for a giant corporation maybe had no emotional tie to the work that they were doing. And they just had a good steady job, and now kind of seeing what else is out there. I think generally speaking, they're searching for the yarigai.
Yarigai.
Although some are also searching for more upward economic mobility and getting away from the kind of seniority-based HR and salary systems that still a lot of mega Japanese corporates, frankly, still have, for right and for wrong, frankly.
Could you explain the seniority system in Japan?
Yeah, so classically speaking, if you were a new grad coming out of a Japanese university, first of all, frankly speaking, kind of the view of the organization is we can't use you for 3 years. So you would go on a rotation, and you would get trained. And that
we used to do everything, like from HR to management
to sales
to
software engineering, right? And you might have been a psych major, and then suddenly you're doing C++ coding 6 months later.
And you have to wear like a recruit suit, because I wore a recruit suit.
Did you?
Yes.
I never wore one of those.
So I wore like the black and like blue suit. So went to those like festivals or something.
You've come a long way, right?
So I changed my suit because I'm a startup. So, what do you think of that recruit suit thing?
The nail that sticks out gets hammered is the thing that comes to mind in Japan. And so Japan, after the war, was very motivated to rebuild the economy back, and they built that back through manufacturing and uniformity, and kind of getting everybody on the same page and in the same way, especially when you're manufacturing centric. So, a lot as an economy. So a lot of the kind of like rigid work styles that we're used to are born from the 50s and 60s and 70s, and they've just carried forward. The recruit suit thing, I did it too.
You did?
Looking for jobs, and I quickly realized that I probably can't do this. But going back to the kind of like the age-based age-based HR system, generally what happens is you wear your recruit suit, you get a job, you'd spend 3 years going on rotations, and then slowly after that, you would just work yourself up the ladder.
Yeah.
And then like along the way, a very small percentage of people would be identified as high potential. And then you just kind of slowly work this very linear ladder depending on which rung you're on. And like your salary is predetermined what it'll be 10 years from now.
Right.
And it just kind of is what it is. So it's a very membership-based type of an organization as opposed to like a performance output-based organization, which a lot of people in the West are probably more accustomed to these days. And so I see that as like a really fundamental difference still for foreigners that are coming maybe fresh off the boat, as we say, and they're getting here in Japan, and like it's so different from a organizational OS operating system perspective. It's like we're used to working on OS and we're still working on MS-DOS over here. And so like you gotta kind of understand that deep-rooted kind of DNA of the organization if you're going to try to do well in a Japanese company.
Right. Just to give context to our viewers, so I attended a Japanese college, so we have to start job hunting at the same time.
I did too.
And we wear like this black recruit suit and attend those like seminars.
Setsumekai seminars.
And so the Japanese fiscal year starts in April. So like we joined the company, like literally like tens of, like hundreds of people at the same time.
On the same day.
On the same day.
In a giant conference room or like a hall, right?
And everyone's like 22 or something. Like everyone's on the same age and they go up the same ladder.
Yeah. So I also did that when I was at Rikkyo University. So I did the whole new grad job hunting process here. Quickly realized it wasn't for me. And also kind of through that process, I also realized that, again, speaking in generalities, most university students struggle to get into university, and that's the point of it. And a lot of them then, that's kind of like their first time of freedom to like do whatever they want.
Right.
So a lot of Japanese college students use that time period to socialize and have fun and be
just
free.
hang out,
just chill. Like the academic requirements weren't as stringent as they are, for example, like in the US where I came from. And so when I transferred back for my last year of university, I really had to buckle down. But the biggest difference in the US is, in particular, as a new grad, you're expected to contribute.
Yes.
Whereas here, historically speaking, you were just expected to be a member and be a cultural positive and kind of learn the business over time.
And say yes to your boss. Yeah.
Always. Never say no, never question, right? Which I struggled with. So.
Yeah, I can tell. So do you think that whole system is changing right now?
Little by little it is. And what we're also finding is a lot of Japanese companies now are reducing the allocation of new grad hires and increasing the allocation of mid-career hires because they have such a gap in middle management or highly skilled capabilities because of this generalist approach, that they're trying to kind of reposition their organizational capabilities maybe over like a 10-year period. Again, it's not going to happen in the snap of a finger, but we are seeing it slowly changing, and there's also several companies here that are actively working at changing the new grad hiring approach as well. So I think less and less that new grad hiring style to finding a job is appealing to young university students. So I think that the companies are really starting to respond to that.
At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned ringi. Could you explain what ringi is, and do you think that is changing also?
Okay, so ringi is basically the managerial process of getting consensus-based decision making. And so generally speaking, you would get approval at one layer and they would bring it up to another layer and to another layer. And depending on the complexity of the decision, you might have to get approvals horizontally from different business units. And
you
then
have to get the stamps.
Yeah, and so exactly, that's where I was going. So then literally in Japan, they have this thing, still have this thing called a hanko in this world of digital signatures for the last 10 years. Where it's literally, it's a red stamp. And so the real meaning of ringi is basically literally walking around and getting the red stamp of approval on whatever the decision is that you're making. And so that, slows down decision making, it makes it more complex. And so that's one of the contributing factors to maybe the competitiveness of Japan Inc.
Yeah.
But in a way, they also do that because everybody came up as generalists and they all have a holistic view on the business. And so historically speaking, they thought that that would generate better decisions. And I think in the pre-lightning speed, internet-driven digital AI world, it was probably a really good decision-making process. But the context in which we're operating is changing. So.
Yeah, I once interviewed a senior management for a very traditional Japanese company, and he said that it's a way to keep everyone on the same page and
alignment.
Yes, and on the same boat. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that, and I know historically it did generally generate pretty good decisions. But if you're needing to ship a product out in, for example, 6 months as opposed to 3 years, it can slow you down as well. And so I think, like as with anything, it's a double-edged sword. And I think the context in which the economic and societal context in which Japan Inc. or any company globally, frankly, is operating has changed significantly in the last 30 years.
Yes.
And so to think you're going to get the same results doing the same things with a different context is kind of like Albert Einstein's definition of crazy, right? So, I think we just got to continue to kind of adapt to like the speed that we have to operate at and in the context in which we're working, right?
Right. So we understand that Japan's kind of maybe slowly but changing right now. So could you give me like 3 reasons you recommend people outside Japan, like international, come and work in Japan?
Yeah, totally. First of all, I'm super bullish on coming and working in Japan.
Okay.
I've only ever worked in Japan. I've never worked in the US. So I'm clearly kind of living proof that it's doable. I think that there's a couple of trends here that can play very well for foreigners to come to Japan. One would be this just explosion of AI. And Sakana AI is, for example, just the tip of the spear, in my opinion. I don't think any country globally is maybe as well positioned as Japan is to benefit from Gen AI for a lot of reasons. Japanese companies have very complex legacy IT systems that are still working, and it's very difficult to replace those. And so in a lot of instances from what we've researched and looked at, you can really layer Gen AI on top of legacy systems and get incredible efficiency gains from like a business process perspective. So I feel like if you're an AI engineer or an AI implementation expert or a transformation implementation expert that maybe speaks Japanese if you're doing client-facing work, I do think that the AI boom is going to hit extremely squarely in Japan. And you're going to see incredible efficiency gains in Japan Inc. over the next 5 to 10 years. So you may not have all the AI companies come from Japan, but I think there's a reason why OpenAI set their first international office up outside of the US and Japan.
That's true.
Also, Japan respects IP, and it's a democratic country, and you've got good data center infrastructure here. So I think that there's a lot of the raw materials here for AI to do extremely well, and I think that if you're any AI solution targeting business process efficiency or whatever, I think that there's a huge opportunity for foreigners here.
Well, AI, because that's a very interesting narrative, because I cover business usually, and I interview a lot of Japanese CEOs, and they are kind of losing confidence because, AI, it's a US company, OpenAI, we lost the opportunity again. But you have a different perspective.
I've got a very different perspective because if I'm the CEO of Hitachi, I mean, maybe I want to control the AI, or if I'm the CEO of any other mid-tier manufacturer, I probably won't care the most about improving my own operational efficiency in the business that I'm strongest at. And so, I think from a societal pride perspective, and Japan's a very prideful country.
Yes.
Yes, of course, we want to see the next OpenAI come from Japan, but frankly, it's already probably too late in that domain, right?
True.
But I think Sakana AI is a great opportunity on these like smaller models, and there's stuff that can be done here, where Japan can, one, still create some really incredible AI companies, but two, if we're talking just about the broader economy, how to use it and how to make yourselves more efficient is probably a bigger economic impact than making the next unicorn, right? So I'm much more focused on the application of the technology in kind of this context. So I think it's an absolutely ripe situation for the right type of skills and the right kind of attitude towards working in Japan, et cetera. I think it's a really good chance.
Got it. What are the other 2 reasons?
There's another one that is just highly correlated to this, but it's not limited to AI. But I think historically, Japan has struggled to pump out globally competitive computer science graduates. I don't have all the stats, but we've looked at this a lot. And so there's a very, very large shortage of just software engineering talent, period. And so, going back 7 or 8 years ago, anecdotally, we almost never used to get, in my headhunting business, requests from Japanese companies to hire foreign engineers.
Oh, no requests.
Almost none, because they didn't want to sponsor visas and the risk was too high, and the person's not going to integrate. But now I would say close to 50% of our requests are that. And we've kind of built that niche.
Wow.
But I think it's super indicative of the fact that Japan Inc. is starving for digital talent. And so I think, if you're a full stack web developer, if you're an embedded systems developer, if you've done robotic systems development, and you really kind of think back into what Japan is really good at, especially deep tech space, I think that there's immense opportunity for software developers. Again, not without challenges, but if you're looking at opportunity and like the highest probability to get a job here, I think that that's one of the absolute best places to be.
Do you get paid well?
Depends on where you're coming from.
Okay.
and it depends on who hires you.
That's true, okay.
Granted, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, Japan's a more, still culturally, it's more of a membership-based type of, economy. And so comp is also still a little bit more membership-based. So it's a little bit more, subdued, I guess is probably the best way to put it.
They try to keep the,
a bit even.
Yeah, a bit even, yes.
But we are also seeing a lot of companies that are taking what even means and they're jacking that up. So even within the Japan context. So yes, the yen is super weak short term. Personally, I don't care. I'm here for the long term. But yes, it's short term. So if you're comparing your salary in San Francisco in dollars to here, you're going to get hammered. But also, cost of living here is tangibly lower than almost any other mega city on the planet. You can walk out and have lunch for 500 yen.
And it's very good.
Which today is like $3.
$3.
And it's delicious,
It's
to your
delicious.
point.
Everything's delicious in Japan.
Exactly. So I've moved a lot of people from overseas here, and anytime the sticking point becomes compensation, you got to look at like purchasing power parity, you got to look at quality of life, and you got to look at like Yardigai, what we talked about earlier. Like, is it something you want to do? Like, is the value of getting experience in Japan worth it to you or not, especially if you're young? So yeah, I don't think that you can put like especially American or maybe Singaporean salary expectations here, or sometimes even like Chinese. Shanghai, they pay very well.
Yes.
But we are seeing more companies paying at near or at global standards as well. So there's pockets of that coming, and I just think that that's only going to increase with time.
Okay. So what are the other reasons? Yeah.
I'd say the third one, so we talked about AI and we talked about software engineering. The third one that I do think that there's a tangible gap is enough highly experienced managerial talent with very specific expertise to help Japanese companies go through whatever the changes are that they're going through. So there could be things like transformation, globalization, modernization of how they work in the back office, because again, we talked about lots of paper-driven processes, et cetera. So we see immense demand for transformation consulting, also very commercial-facing kind of global internationalization. A lot of Japanese companies want to go global. And they don't know how, or they flop when they do.
Right.
And generally, I think that there's a lack of awareness and kind of almost kind of like a cultural empathy towards other cultures when thinking about go-to-market from Japan. And so they try to apply the same playbook, and then they'll fall on their face. So I do think that there's a really good opportunity around transformation, go-to-market executives or et cetera. And also I would say strategic finance. And so we have done a ton of work in the private equity space with buyouts, and almost the constant need is for CFO, FP&A, treasury, capital market experts who can maybe understand Japan, but also more and more manage global
the international
stakeholders.
Market.
Yeah, we're seeing just an immense demand for that as well. So yeah, I mean, I'd say those three areas from like a professional perspective are very high. If I was going to add a fourth one, depending on your angle and what you want to do, I think the tourism market is extremely robust.
Yes.
So, if you're out there listening and you're not a CFO and you're like mid-20s and maybe you've studied, liberal arts or something like that, The number of tourists are exploding.
It's like rock.
Hospitality is exploding. You've seen a lot of the big hotel chains plow a lot of money into Japan. Marriott's expanded like crazy.
Yes.
I think that there's a great opportunity just to like get an amazing life experience and do something to come here and do hospitality maybe for 2 or 3 or 4 years and try to figure out then if you want to keep doing that or if you want to do something different. Because again, there's a huge labor shortage.
Yeah.
Right? Just very practically speaking. So I think there's a great opportunity there as well.
So when I look at the statistics, there's a lot of tourists flocking into Japan, and also people working in Japan.
Right.
Why do you think, like, to me, it seems like a sudden change. Why do you think people are like suddenly coming to Japan?
They've fortunately and unfortunately, they've realized how amazing Japan is.
Okay.
Right?
Finally, they realized.
Like everybody, it's gotten popular.
Okay.
I think the Japanese government's done a great job of trying to appeal.
Yeah.
And
Appeal
market.
tourists, yes.
Market Japan. But frankly, Japan doesn't need marketed. Like it's a phenomenal place to visit. We talked about earlier that lack of propensity to change. I actually think it's one of its charming points. And
Oh, it's a charming point.
absolutely. And
So
like,
why is that?
Where else in the world can you go? And some of the towns you go into, there's not a McDonald's yet in a first world country.
No Starbucks, no McDonald's.
So, some of the smaller cities here, right? And I think the cultural heritage being as deep as it is, as protected as it is, the architecture is really unique. You got the different temples and houses. The terrain is incredible. Cultural traditions are very well protected. I just think like Japan is just one of those few, maybe the only truly first world country that hasn't in a way been kind of like overrun with kind of like Western standards. Because I feel like if I go to London, New York, in Singapore, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, it feels the same. Yeah, same stores.
Yeah, like maybe the makeup of society is a little bit different or whatever, but it's like the same exact stores, and like I order the same thing, and it's like
You get the same food, same
exactly.
drinks. Yeah.
But here, you got like incredible food. It's incredibly safe.
Even the McDonald's are different in Japan. Like,
They're better.
okay, they have different menus.
Different menus and like.
Samurai Mac. Did you try the Samurai?
I haven't tried that.
Okay, it's very good.
Oh, well, maybe we'll have to go together.
Okay. Yeah.
But no, but I do. I think like the world has discovered Japan, and now like we do. On the flip side of that, to a degree, almost have like over tourism. So I kind of fear maybe like a backlash from local communities, and so I also recommend anybody's coming in here to also just be mindful and respectful of. Sometimes you're opening the door in Kyoto and it's literally somebody's living room. So like, let's just be a little bit respectful at the same time, right? And we've had some issues with that. So. I think it should continue. I think it will continue. And I think, I don't see Japan kind of becoming less cool or appealing anytime soon. If anything, I think it's going to continue to increase.
So you're arguing that maybe it's slow to change, but that may be like a charm for compared to other parts of the world.
It's the appeal. And not to be misunderstood, but where I grew up in America, I grew up in Ohio. And I grew up in Eastern Ohio, where we have a lot of Amish communities. I don't know if you know the Amish.
Yes, I know.
But it's an incredible tourist attraction because they still ride around in horse and buggies and don't use electricity. And it's an incredible place.
Yes.
Now, I'm not comparing the Amish to Japan.
Okay.
But like, I do think that all of us globally are seeking that authenticity.
That's true, yeah.
Culturally speaking. And Japan is just so authentic, right?
So let's talk about companies. We mentioned Sakana AI. So people like outside Japan, people like for them, Japanese companies like Toyota, Sony, and the Nikkei 225 is very high. So other hidden gems or any companies we should be aware of. Yeah.
So kind of thinking around like the bigger enterprise companies, one company that comes to mind is Keyence.
Keyence.
Yeah, I don't know if the users out there know Keyence, but they basically do factory automation. I think they've got operations in something like 100 countries. They've got hundreds of thousands of customers. They've got operating margins of 80%. It's unheard of. They're one of the most efficient return on invested capital companies globally. So from a technology perspective, but also from like a business management efficiency perspective, they're a total gem. Their CEO is very famous as well. So I do see really interesting opportunities with somebody like a Keyence. Kind of shifting away from that space, another one that's really interesting is that joint venture between TEPCO and Chubo Electric called JERA. I don't know if the users have ever heard of JERA, but they're basically like at the forefront of kind of the energy transformation of Japan. They're the second largest buyer of LNG globally. They also operate a number of legacy dirty power plants that they're trying to clean up. And one of the ways that they're trying to clean it up is through really massive deployment of digital technology and capabilities. They've got really good capabilities in digital twins. They're investing in wind and solar assets. They're a major player globally, and the average person's probably never heard of them. So
No. Do you think that's like the issue of Western media? Because I think people, like internationally, people have never heard of Kians, or do you think, or maybe the issues with PR or something.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know if it's an issue with Western media or if it's an issue with PR and the focus to promote oneself globally by Japan Inc. But I think both those companies are utterly fascinating on different levels. Another company that I know here would be somebody like a Denso. They're, depending on the year, they're the largest or second largest automotive components maker in the world. But anywhere on the planet, I think they're deployed in something like 40% of cars. So the data that they get and the technology that they produce throughout the vehicle, and they're on the forefront of autonomous driving and all these different things. They've got big global operations, and they're just a really good organization. Like there's opportunity there as well.
But no one knows Denso. Do you think
everybody knows Bosch, right? But they don't know Denso.
Do you think Japanese people are too shy? We should be more focus on PR and tell the world we're great.
Yeah, I would like to see Japan focus a little bit more on PR because I think it has a ton to offer. And in a previous show with you guys, I think we talked a little bit that I think despite its kind of economic power and incredible things to offer, Japan often punches below its belt on the global stage. And there's probably historical context behind that, but like I think it's fine for Japan to kind of come out and be a little bit more, confident in itself and assertive in these things, because Japan, there's some really incredible businesses here, and like there's a lot it can offer if it does it in the right way.
Agree. So I think, Casey, we need to wrap up. Any final comments or something we have not talked about, or anything to add?
No, I would just say like for any users globally that are interested in Japan, I think it's a great time. I'm extremely bullish on the opportunities that exist here. I've built my life here. And so I would really encourage anybody, come for a visit first, but also tangibly look at, trying to either do a short-term work stay here, or even, on the extreme side, you can build your life here like I have. I think it's an incredible place to live once you get settled in, and there's tons of opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey-san. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yep.